You are listening to the Stave Off Podcast, the podcast that gives you the information you need to stave off illness and injuries, letting you live a happy life. And now your hosts, Nick and Christina.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Stave Off Podcast. My name is Christina Novak, and I will be your host for today. I hope you guys are having a wonderful Monday. If you are here in Ontario, we have a provincial holiday called Family Day today. And so this recording is made live on February 20th of 2017. So us Ontarians in Canada are actually enjoying a day off. And so we're at the gym for a couple of hours in the morning. We have a couple of classes so that people can start their day off with a good workout or physio if need be. And then they get to spend the day with their families. It's been a really crazy time at Stave Off. I actually had some health stuff come up last week, which made me indisposed for a couple of days. But not to worry, everything is good. And we are back on the mend and still here doing the podcast. And because I was kind of under the weather, I spent a lot of my time sitting or resting or being told that I need to sit and rest more. And I thought that this would be a good time to now do a podcast on sitting. It's been claimed a lot, especially in popular media, the whole phrase sitting is the new smoking. And I thought that we would kind of deep dive into some of these concepts and what the research is starting to say about sitting, and then try and finish off with some ways to incorporate, a little bit more movement into our days. And I'll give you some tips, and I'll link to some of the resources on Stave Off and an amazing article that I just read actually a couple of days ago from one of my committee members who is showing one of the more updated articles on the evidence around sitting. All right, so what I thought I would talk about first is the fact that when we're talking about sitting too much, we refer to this as a term called sedentary behavior. Essentially, we're sitting on our butts doing nothing. We have to distinguish this a little bit from lack of exercise. A lot of times these can be confused between sitting too much and not exercising, but they're actually different things. You can have a job where you're relatively sedentary, where you sit a good portion of your day, but you can still be physically active. You can sit for, say you have a 10-hour shift that you have to sit the entire time, and then you go to the gym for an hour or an hour and a half or half an hour or whatever your workout routine looks like. You are still overall in a sedentary job, but you are a physically active person. And as we start talking a little bit about some of the research, that distinguishing factor, the distinguishing between sedentary behavior and physical activity, is going to be really important. And so I think the reason why this has come into a lot of attention lately is because of some of the shifts that we've started to have in our culture. I'm talking specifically too about, Canada, the US, and even like going into Europe and Australia and everything like that. Speaking to our context, is that a lot of our entertainment, a lot of our vocations, so a lot of our jobs are starting to become more sedentary. Some of the, the trades are starting to become more computer based, and there's more, electronics and things that are doing work for us. And that is causing us to be navigators behind technology rather than the primary movers for different things. And a lot of jobs then that were fairly physical jobs are becoming less so. The other thing is with the rise in technology, A lot of our entertainment has us sitting. How often are we playing video games or sitting down for dinner or going to a movie or watching television shows? Heck, the whole binging on Netflix for 8 hours, that's 8 hours of sedentary activity where we're not really doing a lot. And therefore, there's been a lot of attention to, this switch in our, source of entertainment where we're not necessarily moving around as much. And that's when some of these research studies have started to come out talking about, how much are we really moving throughout our day? And what does that mean for our health? And what we're also starting to find is not only do we have a culture where we're sitting a lot more, as we get older, we tend to sit even more. When we're younger, we tend to have a little bit more energy. We want to move around a lot more. But as we start to get older, we're seeing that there's a fairly linear trend around age and number of hours spent sitting. The thing that I'm going to say about a lot of the research that is going on right now in terms of sitting is that we haven't really been able to figure out if sitting and health outcomes are a direct relationship or an indirect relationship. And I'll link to the article that I was talking about a little bit earlier that was saying essentially that we are coining the term sitting is the new smoking, but it absolutely isn't. And the argument that this author was making was that when we think about smoking and health outcomes, we have such a strong research base to show that smoking directly causes negative health outcomes. We know that smoking causes lung cancer. What we don't know is if sitting too much directly causes negative health outcomes. So I'll come back a little bit. There's been some systematic reviews that have been done in the last couple of years. And a systematic review is kind of our gold standard, or what researchers see as the highest level or one of the highest levels of evidence, because it's pooling together of a bunch of different research studies that have shown that people who tend to sit more are at higher risk for all-cause mortality, so generally death, for poor terminology and lack of better phrasing. Some types of cancer are increased for people who spend more time sitting. Obesity is increased, risk of diabetes, and risk of cardiovascular disease or heart disease. And we talked about that a little bit a couple of episodes ago. But the links here, and here's where it starts to get muddled. The links here, we're not really sure, because people who sit more tend to be overweight. And so being overweight has also been linked as a risk factor for different types of cancers and heart disease. So is sitting causing us to be overweight, and it's being overweight that's causing our risk for these health conditions? Or is there a direct link between sitting and heart disease? Do you see what I mean? Where the exact relationships is, if I sit 10 hours a day, I'm going to die earlier. Is that true? Or if I sit 10 hours a day, I'm more likely to be overweight. And we know that being overweight is a risk factor for diabetes and heart disease and all of these other negative health outcomes. Or is it that there's something going on in my life that forces me to sit more, and therefore I'm at risk for these health issues? For example, am I sitting more because my legs are hurting me, or I have pain somewhere in my body, and therefore I can't work out or I can't move around as much because it hurts, so I've increased my weight, and therefore I've had all these health outcomes? Or I'm just not moving because I have a circulation issue, and then that is predisposing me to worse outcomes from heart disease. It gets complicated, right? And that's why us in the research realm, we take a lot of different angles when we're asking these types of questions, and we really deep dive into the different nuances. And then we come back together once we've done all of these little individual studies and started to see, what those relationships really look like. So I think that the jury is still out. We can't necessarily say that there's a direct link between some of these health outcomes, but definitely as a society, I think we can start to say that, sitting too much is going to have negative repercussions, whether it be because of an indirect or a direct consequence. And so I started looking a little bit more into some of the research on this, and I thought that something was some of these relationships were really interesting. Like, for example, people who sit because of work don't necessarily have the same negative health outcomes as people who sit because of some other reason. And one of the discussion points was, well, maybe if you're sitting for your job, you're probably okay in terms of your financial situation, and people who are in a better financial situation tend to have better health outcomes. And so that's just another example of where we don't really know where the direct links are, but we just know that as a whole, we need to start incorporating a little bit more movement into our day. I mentioned a little bit earlier that as we get older, we tend to see that some of our people who are in our 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, we sit more and more. There was a study that got released in 2015. I believe Harvey was the first author, and he estimated that older adults spent almost 11 hours out of their day sitting. If we think that we spend 8 to 9 hours out of our day sleeping, that's potentially 20 hours out of 24 where we're sitting and we're not really expending a lot of energy. And that can, really be detrimental for our health. We're not getting out as much, which could mean that we're not seeing people as much, that we're not getting to do all the things we want to do. And there's been some links around sitting and depression. Again, we're not sure if that's a direct link or that's something else, like you can't move around because of some issue. And so obviously your mental health may take a negative dip if there's something that's preventing you from being able to move around. But I think that's a big concern for us who are like someone like myself who's working with older adults on a very consistent basis, because we want to make sure that as we're getting older, we're feeling like we're able to move around our environment, that we're able to get up and moving, and that we don't feel like we have to be sitting for long periods of day or long periods throughout the day, or that we have the energy level, because as we get older, obviously our energy level isn't the same as, say, our grandbabies who are running circles around us all the time. But we want to make sure that we have the energy and we have the ability to not be sitting our entire day. Okay, I made the argument that we sit too much, even though we don't know if it's directly causing negative health outcomes or it's indirectly. The bottom line is that we know that as a society, we are sitting too much, whether or not that's because of culture or work or changes in technology. The amount of time that we're sitting is definitely going up, but we are definitely becoming more aware of it. As we get older, we tend to sit even more, and there could be a whole bunch of reasons for that. Sitting, whether directly or indirectly, has been linked to a bunch of negative health outcomes, some of them being all-cause mortality, which is that people who sit more tend to die 2 years earlier than someone who's fairly active, which is quite a crazy statistic to pull out there. Our risk of obesity goes up. Our risk of certain cancers goes up. Our cardiovascular risk goes up. Our risk of depression goes up. And our risk of diabetes goes up. From again, direct or indirect. That's huge. That's huge. And so there's been a lot of initiatives that have started, especially I would say in the last 5 years, to really incorporate more movement throughout our day. I published an article a couple of months ago just with 5 easy ways to start incorporating a little bit more movement. And I thought I would go over some of them now just for a little bit of a refresher and try and put this front of mind, especially if you're listening to this podcast as you're going to work. Okay, exercise. I've talked about this ad nauseum and I'm going to beat on that drum. Exercise definitely helps to mitigate some of the negative effects of sitting. Some people even say that it gets rid of the negative effect entirely. Jury's still out. Some people say it improves it 30%. Some people say it improves it 100%. We still don't know. But what we do know is that moving, even if we have a sedentary job, moving helps a lot. Current exercise guidelines for adults is to try and get 30 minutes a day of movement where our heart rate is up in whatever style of exercise you choose on at least 5 days, up to 7, obviously not at a higher intensity all the time, but 5 to 7 days moving around at least 30 minutes. For kids, that increases to an hour. We talked about the energy level being different for our grandkids than for ourselves. And so the kids, they need more exercise. They need to burn off more energy than we do. Okay, so some other things other than hitting the gym after work. Drinking water is definitely a big one. One, we know that hydration is amazing for our entire body. We need it for attention and for our kidney function and for our metabolism and all these different things. But it also makes you have to go to the bathroom. And so sometimes I will drink water, 1, because I have to, but 2, because if I have to go to the bathroom, it means that I need to stand up. And for a PhD student and for a business owner, there are often big stretches of time outside of work hours where I'm sitting behind a computer. And I'm one of those people that if I get stuck on a project, my eyes are glued to my computer screen for far too long, and I need something to distract myself. I'm a big fidgeter, but I still spend a lot of time staring at a computer. And therefore, I'll have my water bottle with me, and because I have to go to the bathroom, I have to get up. And it's actually a really good thing for me because it reminds me that I need to be standing up every once in a while. Okay, another strategy. So we're going to try and go over 5. 1 was exercise, move. 2 is drinking water, which we should be doing anyway, but it also helps us move more. The third one is setting an alarm every 45 minutes or so. Some people say every 20 minutes, but I think that that's impossible for me when I'm in a project. So every 45 minutes to an hour, sometimes I'll set a movement alarm. And to be honest, if we're really concentrating, a lot of times we only have focus for 45 minutes to an hour. We tend to get really distracted anyway. And therefore, having that alarm and knowing that, in 45 minutes, I'll be able to move around. 1, it helps me stay concentrated and paying attention during that time. But it also reminds me to move on the other side of that continuum. And you can set it on repeat or turn it off if it's getting really annoying or that you really need it. But we always need that accountability, that reminder, kind of like some of the wearable technology now, like Fitbit, they will give you a little vibration on your wrist if you haven't moved around a certain amount within the hour. And I think that's really great because it's reminding us that, we need to move around a bit more. Okay, that's number 3, a standing alarm. Number 4 is the way that your workplace is set up. If I am doing some work for school and I'm at Stave Off, I'm at the clinic, there's times where I'll go into one of the treatment rooms or I'll go into the other room knowing that I need to do some printing. What that means is that if I really have to do that printing, then I have to get up and move to it. Or instead of emailing a colleague who is just down the hall, go down the hall and talk to that person directly. I don't know if that will annoy the person that you're also trying to talk if they're busy doing something, but just making excuses throughout your day to go and get something that is outside of arm's reach. And that could mean moving the printer a little bit further away so that when you print things that go directly to the printer, you have to go up to get them. It may not seem like much, but all those little things can accumulate throughout the course of the day so that you're getting more movement in. You're incorporating a little bit more movement. Okay, so far we've talked about exercise, obviously after work or before work, drinking water, having a standing alarm, and the fourth one was having a printer that's a little bit further away, having something in your workplace that's further away that you need to get to. The fifth one that I really like is during lunch, trying to get outside of your work environment. I know sometimes this is really hard. That could even mean taking a conference call on headphones if you are using a cell phone and listening to the call outside while going for a walk. Sometimes it's just that you have to make these type of things a priority. And I completely understand how hard that can be. But our health is our biggest asset, and trying to figure out some of these ways to incorporate more activity is going to be really important. Okay, so another one that I haven't really mentioned. So those are the big five for me. The fifth one, which I think is really great, but we don't really know much about them yet, is the use of standing desks. What standing desks are adjustable height desks where you can take your workstation and bring it up to a chest height, and it allows you to continue working while standing. They become enormously popular in the last couple of years, and particularly in the last 12 months, they've really seemed to boom. And for some people who have back pain, standing desks can be amazing because they just have pain when they sit. And so that became one of the reasons why standing desks were being incorporated more into the workplace, but also because of all the information that's starting to come out about some of the negative consequences of sitting too much, And so people have been incorporating standing desks into their workstations. There hasn't been a ton of research, to be honest, on standing desks and how they can improve outcomes. Because they're so new, we won't have research that has followed people over time and compared people who sit versus people who sit and stand. Some of the sedentary research has talked about how if you stand for long periods of time, it can be very similar to sitting. It's that we're staying in one place for too long without moving. And therefore, the argument for some people has been, well, if you're standing for 8 hours versus if you're sitting for 8 hours, is there really a difference? And to be honest, I don't think we really know. I think the biggest benefit for standing and sitting is that switch. The one thing I really like about standing desks is that you can spend 45 minutes standing and then spend 45 minutes sitting and go back and forth between the two. And I wouldn't recommend for somebody who's been sitting for 8 hours and is used to that going to standing for 8 hours, because sometimes your legs can kill. But I think that we're going to start to see some of the positive benefits of the standing desks. The only other thing that I saw, it was a researcher who has done a little bit of preliminary research on standing desks, is that people who use standing desks, sometimes they can be less active because they think that they've kind of done their exercise because they didn't sit, they stood during the day. And that is not true. Just because you have a standing desk doesn't mean that you don't need to exercise anymore. And I thought that was a really interesting research finding, because sometimes that is what we do. We think that, oh, I've done my exercise. I was standing all day. I was on my feet all day. It doesn't mean that, or it means that I don't need to exercise. And what we know to be true is that that isn't true, and that we still need to be exercising. But I really do like standing desks, and I think that they're going to be something that's going to be growing in popularity in the next, couple of years. And they're also going to be researched more. So we're going to see, they're going to untie some of those relationships and see what the benefits or lack of benefits really are with standing desks. And I think there's a lot to come in that world. So that's like my bonus one. So the 5, just to recap, we got how to incorporate more movement. We have exercise, drinking water so that we have to go to the bathroom. Take a walk at lunch. I'm going out of order a little bit here. Using a standing alarm so that after 45 minutes or an hour, we're reminding ourselves that we need to, stand up and move a little bit, and redirecting our work environments that we have to get up to go get things like documents from a printer. And then our bonus one is the standing desk. The last conclusion that I'm going to make with the whole sitting more, or that we spend too much time sitting, is that I think this is one piece out of the huge overarching umbrella that as a society, we tend to be physically inactive. We're not moving around in general, exercise or just life as much as we need to. And I think that because we have so much information about the benefits of exercise and movement, and that our bodies are supposed to move, we are designed to move, that is the big thing that we need to be drawing attention to. Incorporating more movement and incorporating more exercise into our lives. And it can be really hard. And if your first step is putting the printer a little bit further away so that you stand, or going for a 10-minute walk at lunchtime, I think that's amazing. And good for you. And once you get used to that, then you can take the next step. But it's all about trying to incorporate more movement in a way that works for your schedule, works for your crazy busy life, but also makes your health a priority. And this is one of those things where we need to, and your body will really thank you for it. And so will your energy level, surprisingly. I think sometimes when we sit too much, we just get a case of the blahs, and, we don't really want to incorporate more movement because we just feel tired. All right. I think that is the end of this podcast for the week. I hope that you enjoyed it. I will put the show notes for this episode at staveoff.ca/podcast. I think it's going to be podcast-episode013. We're on episode 13. In the show notes, I will link to that article that I was speaking to from the researcher looking at sitting, sedentary behavior, and actually done the preliminary research on standing desks. I'll also link to some of our previous articles on age and how we sit more, and, what it means to be inactive, and some of the ways to incorporate more movement. If you haven't subscribed to us yet on iTunes, please do that. If you think that there is a friend who may enjoy the podcast, we would love it if you would share it with them. If you have any more questions for us, you can always contact us at info@staveoff.ca. Otherwise, have an amazing week. If you're in Ontario, have a wonderful family day, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Stave Off podcast. Go to staveoff.ca to check out the show notes and more helpful content and how you can lead a long and happy life. This podcast is brought to you in partnership with the Senior Rehab Project at seniorrehabproject.com.